I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and it's after watching the children's sermon this morning, I was thinking, oh my goodness, it's so much easier to teach adults than 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. So it's also nice not actually to be in the college classroom anymore either, and of course, you all have your coffee in front of you, which is great, and maybe a bite to eat. But the main difference that I see between you and a college classroom is the fact that you don't have your phones out and you're not texting all of your friends while the class goes on. So I'm Philip Otterness, and I've been a member here at St. Mark's since 1996, when my wife and I and our sons moved here from Iowa, and I'm always at the early service. So if you're at the later service, I'm sorry, I haven't met you, but it's great to have you in this class. And just a short bit about my background. I obviously have been a professor of history and political science at Warren Wilson College, and that's why I moved here in 1996, was to begin teaching there. And I finally retired from there at the end of the fall semester in 2022. So, and since that time, I've actually been continuing some of my own research, and I'm working on a book on the history of the founding of New Bern, North Carolina. So my main area of study is actually not the Romans, but is German-speaking migrants to North America, particularly during the colonial period. So that's where most of my work has been, and I continue to work on now the Germans and Swiss who founded New Bern in 1710. But one of my favorite courses to teach when I was at Warren Wilson was what we called Western Civ 1, which was essentially Greek and Roman history and then the Middle Ages. And often when I'm sitting in church, I think about what is the context for some of the stories that we hear in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, and then, what was going on in the world, well, in the Western world, in the early years of Christianity. So this course is not really going to be church history, which I'm not particularly an expert at, so I'm always fearful, and in the past I've taught a course here on the Reformation, and then I'd look into the class and I would see like 4 or 5 retired Lutheran ministers, and it always made me a little bit nervous. But what I want to talk about is what was this broader, really sort of Mediterranean world in which Jesus lived, and then in which Christianity emerged as the dominant religion. Okay, and oddly enough, although the name of the course is Rome at the time of Jesus, that's just sort of a simple name that I worked out with Katie that's easy to put there. But what I'm going to do today is not really talk about Rome at all, but try to set the context for the Roman Empire, because in order to understand the Roman Empire, we sort of need to know what was going on before it. And that also helps us to understand a little bit of early Christian history as well, because obviously the Hebrews or the Jewish people were living in this region before the Romans took over the area. So what I'm going to do today is to cover, I don't know, 2,500 years of history. Real quick, what do we have left here? And just sort of bring us up until the Roman Empire. And I know that for some of you, this is probably going to be review, and this is going to be very superficial. But I hope that you'll bear with me. And even I have to keep looking at my notes, even though I've taught this course dozens and dozens of times, because I can't get any of the dates straight. But we'll try to work this through and see. So the point, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but how many Sundays are you going to go?
yeah, that's a good point, and I should review that very quickly. It's going to be 5 Sundays, all right, but next Sunday we won't meet, and then we'll meet for 3 more Sundays, and then there's another event going on during this time, and then we'll meet the 5th time, okay? And I'm glad you raised that, because I should just sort of very quickly say how I'm planning to do this. So this first class will bring us up until sort of that background before we see the emergence of the Romans. And then the next class will talk about the early Romans and the early Roman expansion. And this was during a period that historians refer to as the Roman Republic, okay? And that's because there wasn't yet an emperor running things, so this was a republican form of government that we'll talk about. And then the third lesson will talk about the fall of that Roman Republic, and this really brings us into the time of Jesus, and it was a time of huge amounts of turmoil within the Roman, within Rome, let's just put it that way. And then we have the emergence of the Roman emperors, and the first one that you know about is Augustus, who of course was the emperor at the time of Jesus' birth and was in fact the first of the Roman emperors. And so we'll talk about those early emperors, and this will give us a little time to read about Nero and some of those folks. So there's lots of good stories to tell. And it's where you first begin to see the first non-biblical accounts of Jesus, so that both of Jesus and of the Christians, so that you begin to see historical accounts where people who are not Christians begin to refer to this new group that's emerging in Rome. And then the final class will be on the late empire, and we'll talk about, one usually talks about the fall of the Roman Empire, but that's not quite what it is, and then the growth of Christianity during that period. So it's going to be a very, very quick overview. All right? So where I usually like to start when I've taught this course on Western Civ, and when we begin to think about human societies and human societies in the Mediterranean region in particular, we talk about agricultural being introduced around the year 10,000 BC. So if we've got agriculture then in 10,000 BCE, and then what follows after that, of course, what agriculture allows is for people to settle down in one place, right? So you can grow your food so you don't have to move around and hunt animals or gather food, but you can actually begin to grow it. And so you then begin to see settlements, and the earliest settlements that generally are seen in the West date from around 8,000 to 7,000 BC. And in fact, one of the very earliest of these is one that we know from the Bible, is Jericho, and it appears that Jericho existed around 7,000 BC. So this is one of the earliest ones. And originally what you would see, and this all comes from the archaeological record, is people living largely in very small communities of perhaps 100 to 200 people to begin with, mud huts, the kinds of things that don't survive very long. But by the time you get to 7,000 BC, you're beginning to see larger settlements, perhaps 1,000 people, fortified walls. We all know about the fortified walls around Jericho, right? And so you begin to get these larger settlements. And then we get something that historians usually refer to as the emergence of civilizations. And this was always confusing to my students because they didn't think that these people that lived in these civilizations seemed particularly civilized, right? But when I say civilization, what I'm talking about is a more complex society where you have larger groups of people settling together. And as you get larger groups of people settling together, then what you have to have is usually some sort of system of authority. So you begin to see the emergence of various structures of government that come into place. You have to have laws. In other words, just the rules. What are the rules so that we can all live together and not kill one another and survive and perhaps prosper? And then a very important thing is that you begin to see division of labor. So some people will remain farmers, but not everybody's going to be a farmer, right? And some people work in the government, and some become lawyers, and some become priests, and all kinds of things. So you begin to see a much more complex society, and then with that, trade with other groups of people, the creation of armies. Often this is followed by expansion of territory and greater wealth and so forth. All right, and as all of those things come together, then we begin to get more and more records of them, in part because people began writing things down. They gain a form of writing, and they build larger structures that survive that the archaeologists can uncover for us. So when we begin to talk about these civilizations, these larger, more complex societies, what we have is a period of about 5,000 years where people have been settling down, but there hasn't been much along these larger lines. But around 3000 BC, you begin to see in the the Eastern Mediterranean, the emergence of these larger civilizations. And two of them that emerge around 3000 BCE are the Sumerian civilization and the Egyptian. And so I'll start with the Sumerians. And this map's a little bit misleading because what it does is it shows all the various civilizations that lived in this region of the world over about a 2,000, 3,000 year period, all right? So they're all kind of stacked on top of one another. The Sumerians are, here you see Sumer, and so this was the original area of the Sumerian civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what's today Iraq. And one thing about the Sumerians, it wouldn't have been a situation where there was one central government over all of Sumer, but what you had were a number of powerful city-states, and these city-states were each self-governing, but then they confederated together from time to time, especially when, in terms of warfare and expansion. But they shared a common culture, which meant that they shared the same language, they had the same form of writing, they had, just all the various things that people share. So you can have a shared culture without necessarily having a shared government. So we don't have the country of Sumer, but we have the Sumerian civilization made up of all of these city-states in this region. One of the things that they do in Sumer is they develop a way of writing, which I think is rather clever. It's called cuneiform, and cuneiform comes from the Latin for a wedge, right? So it's a Latin word for a wedge, and the wedge looks like this, okay? And what they would do is they would take a piece of wood, a stylus, and they would carve a wedge like this at the end of it, right? So imagine this tip on here is carved like that wedge, right? Then you get some clay, some wet clay, and you begin to pound in it like this to write, okay? And it's not a phonetic alphabet, it's a sort of a type of pictogram, but you might do something like this, and honestly, I know nothing about writing cuneiform, but when I look at it, it kind of looks like that. And you can imagine the scribe having the stylus in their hand and just punching into that mud tablet, right? Boom, 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 boom. And they could write very, very quickly. And there was an educated class who could read this. I had a colleague when I was working at Warren Wilson who was an expert in the Sumerian culture, and he could read these tablets. He could read cuneiform and write cuneiform, and I love to talk to him because, like, when I go to do my research and I'll go into an archive and I get to handle these documents mainly from the 1700s, and it's very exciting to me. I'd say, how do you do your research? He says, I go to the British Museum. They have a collection of about 3,000 of these clay. They're about the size of a deck of cards. And they bring them out to him at his table just like they bring papers to me. He picks these things up and he reads them. and they would write across them, both sides and around the edge. Yes? I don't know, but it's similar to, for example, Chinese today and using the pictographs, and so it's that type of way of representing the language, but you have to learn how to read lots and lots and lots of different combinations of these symbols together. Yeah. So this is one of the things and one of the reasons why we have records of the Sumerian civilization. The other thing that I love about Sumer is its system of math. And rather than being a decimal system, they based it on 60. And this all seems like really crazy, except that then you begin to remember there's some things about 60 that are really nice. And 60 is divisible evenly by 12 and 10 and 6 and 5 and 4 and 3 and 2. And so there's a lot of things that you can do with it, and we still use it today. 360 degrees in a circle, right? Even like our ruler with 12 inches comes out of this type of system. So that's another thing that we get from the Sumerians. The other culture that emerges at this time is the Egyptian, and initially you had you had what was Lower Egypt, and sometimes it's known as the Lower Kingdom and the Upper Kingdom, which I always find very, very confusing why the lower part is the upper one on the map and so forth, but it has to do with the Lower Nile and the Upper Nile, right? And these two kingdoms were brought together around the year 3000, and you have this marvelous Egyptian civilization that survives for literally thousands of years. We think of the Roman Empire lasting a long time. The Egyptians far outdid them. The Egyptians don't fall until around, let me look at my date here, 330 BC to Alexander the Great. So this is a civilization that's around for 2,500 years or more. When you think of the Great Pyramids of Egypt, outside of Cairo, those were built around 2,500 BC. Okay. And then that sort of the high point of this civilization was between 2,000 and 1,000 BC. King Tut, for example, lived around 1,300 BC. Okay. And of course, the Egyptians also have elaborate laws. They have elaborate ways of governing, and they have their own writing, right? The hieroglyphics, which they wrote, and I'm not even going to attempt to draw you any hieroglyphics or talk about that, right? What I want to, just because I want to move through this quickly, I'm going to move on to a much less powerful, much smaller group, one that did not actually create, at least during this period, a particularly long-lasting civilization, but it's one that we know because it's the one that's described in the Old Testament, and this is the Hebrews. And the Hebrew people were a nomadic people, so they generally did not live in towns, but they moved around, and they took their sheep and their goats and their cattle, and they moved from place to place. They appear that they probably originated in this area of Sumer and probably moved out of the region of Sumer, and these are sort of the tales that you'll see in Genesis, and Abraham in particular. Historians place him around 1900 BC, and so around 1900 BC, Abraham, and other, it appears, other Hebrew peoples moving in tribes. They're a tribal group, so they don't have any kind of central government. They're related through culture, and part of that culture, of course, is monotheism, and the Old Testament tells us a lot about how that culture was organized. But by and large, not living under one central government, at least in these early years. Yeah. Yeah, most historians do. Yes, it's a little bit, uh, you know, other than the Old Testament, you don't have any other records. But there is, what's interesting is the archaeological record tends to back up not necessarily the specifics of the Old Testament, but tends to give us some accounts of these people, and so some sense that there's at least an underlying truth to that. Yeah. Yes. Right. Uh, yeah, I mean, as best we can tell, what you begin to see is people moving, particularly along this so-called Fertile Crescent, where there's enough rainfall and enough water and so forth for agricultural crops. And they can sort of move along the periphery of that and begin to move into this area over, I would, it's hard for me to say for sure, right? When I think of it, I tend to compare it to what we refer to as the barbarian migrations that happened at the end of the Roman Empire, where you begin to see a lot of Germanic tribes spreading into areas of France and Spain and even North Africa. And you see groups of 40 to 80,000 people essentially just moving with the seasons and over time, and in a decade, they've moved from one, what's today Germany into Spain. So I think that you can see this with this, but this is very sort of nomadic, and it's tribal, and you have a number of patriarchs, and Abraham is probably one of these. Okay, and then they eventually settle in this area, which is modern day Israel. The evidence is that there is a period of drought and famine, and some of them do indeed go to Egypt. And so we get the story of Moses, and Moses is usually, I want to say 1300, let me see. Well, I have an even more exact date, around 1270 BC. All right, but that's a long time, right? If you're thinking from Abraham to Moses, right? I mean, if we, a 500-year span, we go back to 1500, and we kind of think that was a long time ago, right? So this is just this small group of people there. Eventually, they are unified under a king. This is Saul, and this is around 1000 BC. And then you have this kingdom that is formed, which is called Israel. And then you have David, and then you have Solomon. And they actually are the ones that, which one is it? It's David that takes Jerusalem first. And Jerusalem is held by the Canaanites or the Phoenicians, okay? And then this is made this original capital of Israel, okay? It gets really kind of complicated here, right? I just mainly want you to know generally what's going on. What then happens is these various tribes that are brought together under the central kingdom after Solomon dies, there's a lot of squabbling going on, and they end up dividing themselves into two separate kingdoms. The one in the north is called Israel, and the one in the south is called Judah. Okay, and this, by the way, Judah is where we get the name Jew from, right? The Jew's name is Judah, from Judah. If you think particularly like in German, where the German word for Jew is Juda, it's very, very similar to this. So now you have these two small kingdoms in this area, really rather weak. And what's going to happen is that eventually you're going to have the expansion of a new kingdom up here, the Babylonians. No, let me get them right. First, the Assyrians, and the Assyrians expand, and they move in, and they actually conquer Israel, but not Judah. And they disperse a lot of the settlers, and they take some of them into captivity. This is around 722 BC is when the Assyrians defeat Israel. Judah remains, but then another group expands out of this area in this region, the Babylonians, and they come in and they take over Judah. And this is in the 500s BC, okay? And they take many of the people into captivity. This is the so-called Babylonian captivity. And we get our story. I believe it's, this is King Nebuchadnezzar, right, in Babylonia, and some of those stories that we get from there. And then what's actually going to happen is that there will be another very powerful empire emerging over here in this region, which is today Iran, known as the Persian Empire. And the Persians come in and expand, and they take over Babylonia. And when they take over Babylonia, they also release the Jews who have been in captivity there, who now move back to Judah. And for reasons that I don't know, it becomes known now as Judea, or Judea as opposed to Judah. But that's sort of the way things work. And essentially what's going to happen in this region up until the time of Jesus is that various empires will take over this area. And these large empires at the time don't have enough people or a large enough army necessarily to come and occupy and absolutely subdue everybody. What they find it's easier to do is to simply say, you pledge allegiance to us, you pay taxes to us, and we'll let you sort of run your own affairs the way you want to, right? We don't have a large enough bureaucracy to send somebody in and run things for you, okay? So this is sort of the situation that Judea is going to find itself in, even under the Romans, at least to begin with. All right. The next group is also a small group, but I want to mention them for a couple of reasons, and this is the Phoenicians. Two reasons that I want to talk about them. One, they'll become very important when we talk about the expansion of the Roman Empire, because the Phoenicians themselves expand. Now, in the Bible, they're known as the Canaanites, and Canaan is shown down here. Most of the area that became Phoenicia, and at the time of Judea, was up in this region here. So it was on the coast in the area of Lebanon today. And one of the things that happened with the Phoenicians is they lived on the coast, and they were great sailors, and they had great navies, and they began to explore the Mediterranean. And then they eventually, what they did was they established colonies all along the Mediterranean, mainly in northern Africa, right? But also as far away as Spain. I'll just jump ahead a few. So this is my Rome map. So the Phoenicians would have been here, but they actually established Carthage, becomes their main city, and all this area that maybe you can see in gray was conquered or settled by the Phoenicians as colonies, parts of Sicily, Sardinia, and even this southern part of Spain. So like, for example, if you go to Cadiz right here in Spain today, you can see ancient Phoenician ruins. Yeah?
So all of this is 1000 BC, plus or minus.
Yeah.
What's going on in Greece at that time and in Italy at that time?
I'm going to get to Greece, and then I'm going to do Italy next class. How does that sound? Okay? So, and what's interesting is that with the Phoenicians, they eventually just sort of abandon the area where they have been, and their main settlement becomes that one at Carthage, and they're known as the Carthaginians. All right? So, and the Romans, when they take over the Western Mediterranean, their main opponent is the Carthaginians. So we'll come back to them and talk about them much later. The other thing that the Phoenicians did was they developed an alphabet, right? And they probably didn't actually develop it themselves. This alphabet was beginning to form, but they began to use it as their official way of writing, and that alphabet had 30 characters, and those characters represented sounds. So it was an alphabet like the alphabet that we have today. And in fact, our modern alphabet is based on the Phoenician alphabet. If you look at Phoenician letters, they're often similar to the letters that we have, although I think there was a certain amount of dyslexia as things went along, and somehow things, first letter of their alphabet was an A. I think it looked like this. I can't remember, but it sort of eventually got turned over, and you can find this with any number of their letters. All right. So, but this is something that's going to become very important, right? Because it makes it much easier for us to read and write and to make new letters, and you only have or new words, and you only have to learn a certain number of symbols. What do we have in our alphabet? 26. Okay, all right. No, you know, it's interesting because I sort of thought the same thing. Oh, phonetics, Phoenicians, but it actually comes from the Greek phonos. So it doesn't. It should. It should, but it doesn't. And what's interesting is that the Phoenicians. Oh, is there a way of? There we go. The Phoenicians later on come into contact with the Greeks, and the Greeks, who had an earlier form of writing and then lost it, decide, well, this seems like a good system, so they borrow it from the Phoenicians, and the Greek letters are quite similar to some of these Phoenician letters, and then the Etruscans, who lived in the northern half of the Italian peninsula, borrowed it from the Greeks, okay, and then the Romans borrowed it from the Etruscans, right, and eventually it was used in a lot of systems, but this is another great contribution of the Phoenicians. All right, so we've got a few of these people in place. I'm not going to talk about the Hittites, but they're up in here, and we see them mentioned from time to time. But I do want to talk about the Greeks. And the first Greek-speaking people began to descend up from up here into this region. It's basically, there's an archaeological record, and there is a bit of a written record for this, but there isn't a whole lot of historical record there. If you've ever been to Greece, you know that it's a very mountainous area. It's relatively dry. It's not a great area for agriculture. And so when the people moved south into this region and pushed the people out that were there before, they settle in these small communities that eventually develop into city-states, right? So there is no central Greek government. We won't have any kind of centralized Greek government during the main period of classical Greece, but we'll have a number of Greek city-states, right? And they all, what holds them together is they all speak Greek or some dialect of Greek, right? They follow the various Greek gods. They share, some literature with one another, plays, and the Olympics actually is something that holds them together. This is something that marks Greek culture. One of the things that I love about the Greeks that marks them is their love of fish, right? Fish is, is like alcohol for them. And they actually describe people who can't control their impulses as people with burned fingers, right? And the reason they have burned fingers is that they grab the fish off the grill. They can't wait to eat that fish, and they're willing to burn their fingers so that they can eat that fish. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. You can actually find this in Greek literature, all right? So these are some of the things that make this Greek culture. But this early Greek culture is going to, let me see if I can. Again, this is ancient Greece 750, and it shows towns from all different kinds of time. This earliest group that starts to move in there, and this is around 2000 BC, okay? They begin to move into this region, and the main town, the most powerful town, will be this one right here, Mycenae. Let's see, I've moved all my markers up here. You can go to Mycenae today, and you'll see the ruins of this particular civilization. And this, some of this we don't know very well. The record is not clear. For a while, many people thought that these Greeks in this region here that had settled in these various little communities here were very heavily influenced by the Cretans. It now appears that they actually moved in and conquered Crete because there was a way of writing, and I don't know how it got this name, but this particular way of writing was known as Linear B. And you would find all kinds of things written in Linear B on the Isle of Crete. So we know that they had a way of writing and so forth. But for the longest time, nobody could read Linear B. And when I say for the longest time, I'm talking about, well, obviously back then they could, but that ability was lost. And then around 1950 or so, somebody worked it out. And this was somebody who had also worked on codes during World War II and so forth. And what he discovered was that Linear B was actually Greek. Right? So it was the Greek language that was being written down in this alphabet, which indicates that probably these Greeks came down and conquered the Cretans. And the Mycenaeans have huge fortifications, huge buildings, and they're also involved in fighting. And it's later on, about almost 800, 900 years later, that the stories of their conquests are written down. Okay? And they're written down in the Odyssey in the Iliad, right? So, and archaeologists have been able to establish that around the time that Mycenae existed, there was a town called Troy up here, one of the famous Trojan horse, which was conquered and appears to have been conquered by these Mycenaean Greeks. Okay, but what's interesting about this, what I find just a little bit mind-boggling is, so you have this ancient Greece under the Mycenaeans and a few other city-states that established power in this region, and then it all falls apart, and we don't know why. We don't know why. It appears that other people began to move in who are also Greek speakers, but probably speak a different dialect, not closely related to them, and this civilization disappears. I mean, it literally disappears. The towns disappear. They're all emptied out. There are no towns of any size left in Greece for a while. They forget how to write. Nobody can write. Nobody can read. There's no reading or writing. It all disappears. This is known as the Greek Dark Ages. It lasts from around 1100 to 800 BC. Okay? And then slowly things begin to reemerge, and after every Dark Age we have a Renaissance, so now we have our Greek Renaissance. Just means Renaissance means rebirth between 800 and 600, and you begin to see writing again. And what's interesting is they're no longer using Linear B. That's all disappeared. It's a very strange, you can look it up, it's a very strange form of writing. It's kind of pictograph kind of thing. And they've borrowed from the Phoenicians and they've developed this new Greek alphabet. And they're beginning to write that way. And this is during this period that Homer's epics are written down. And these are, here's a place where historians are not at all sure that there was a single Homer. There may have been, or it may have been just a lot of stories that have been told over time that are now getting written down, and then you sort of come up with a standard text after a while. So you see during this period the alphabet, along with the literature. You see the first of the Olympic Games, which are staged in 776 BC in Olympia, which, by the way, is not at Mount Olympus, but Olympia is over here. Okay. And you then begin to see the establishment of these Greek city-states, the more famous ones that we'll talk or that you see in the Bible. For example, Athens being the most powerful of them, and Athens controls basically all this small area here, which is known as Attica, and then Corinth here, and of course the great rival to Athens is Sparta here. But one of the things that you should keep in mind is that this Greek civilization at this time was not limited to the area that is today modern-day Greece. Okay, all of this area, which is today in Turkey along the coast here, was also considered as much part of this civilization as any of this area here. So essentially all this that's in this brown color, they're showing as being ancient Greece. And the Greeks were like the Phoenicians. They also colonized much of the Mediterranean. So, for example, they're also on Sicily. Western Sicily is colonized by the Phoenicians. Eastern Sicily by the Greeks. A lot of Greek settlements in southern France, for example, and you can still see Greek ruins in that part of the world. All right, but the center of it is all in this region here. And so you get this period then of sort of classical Greece, the period that it's most well known for, from around 550 to 350 BC. So we're slowly getting closer to the period of the Romans. Just very quickly, what happens to the Greeks? Because Greek civilization is actually going to be very, very important during the time of the Romans as well. You have two major wars that take place. One of them is the Persian Wars, and I bet you can figure out who that war was against. And then you have the Peloponnesian Wars. And I'm not going to go into I always have to look at Peloponnese. There are technically two Persian wars and one Peloponnesian war. These are actually really critical to the development of Greece, because what happens is that all these independent city-states are pulled together into a great alliance during the Persian War, right? And the Persians have come out of the area that's today Iran, so it's this huge, huge empire. They've gone all the way to the Mediterranean. They've now moved into the area that is modern Turkey, and they come up against these Greeks who are living on that western coast of Turkey along the Aegean Sea. And they take them over and have them serve as client states for a while. And then a couple of those small client states said, we don't really like the Persians bothering us. And the Athenians rather stupidly said, oh, well, we'll help you out. We'll send over a few ships. And of course, this is crushed immediately by the Persians. And then the Persians are really upset, and they decide, we're going to teach Athens and the rest of the Greeks a lesson. All right? So they send over an army. This is in 490 and it comes by using its navy. And they land down here, and they're faced by a much smaller group of Athenians whose allies haven't actually showed up yet, so it's all of them against this most powerful army in the world. And the Athenians managed to win. And this is the Battle of Marathon, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, but of course, once they won, then they send a messenger to Athens who runs the race to Athens and gives the news and then falls dead. So, but this is the origin of our modern marathon, right? Although you're no longer required to fall dead at the finish line. So they actually, this is a momentary defeat of the Persians. The Persians thought this would be relatively easy, and now they realize, oh, this is going to be much, much more difficult for us, and we have to be well supplied. And it's difficult to supply yourselves through your navy to bring enough supplies that way. So the second time, 10 years later, they march around this way with a very large army. And the Greeks know that they're going to fall, right? This is the largest army, most successful army in the world. So they say, we have to unify with one another. So you actually get them agreeing that they will bring all of their armies together and they will work under a unified structure of a command. And they give that command to the Spartans because the Spartans, all the Greeks agreed, the Spartans are absolutely nuts, right? The Spartans take away all the boy children at the age of 6 or 7 and throw them in the army at that point, and you have to serve for a period of 50 years. And it is, it's sort of a crazy system. On the other hand, they know that they're pretty good soldiers, so they're willing to go along with this. So they all gather together, and eventually the Persians come around here. Where is it, right? I think it's in here or up here. I'm not quite sure. They face them at the Battle of Thermopylae, and this is one of these great, great battles where the Spartans have like 600? I forget. It's a very small group against, they're outnumbered 10 to 1. And they fight to the last man, and this is a story that the Greeks love to tell, but they actually didn't win. and the Persians come in, and they take over Athens, and they essentially take over this whole thing. But they're having a hard time supplying it, and they need their navy, and the Athenians in particular have a good navy, and so they contribute their navy to the cause, and they manage to defeat the Persians at a battle called Salamis. And after the Persians are defeated in this naval battle, they just realize, wow, this is just way, way too much work, right? And I think we know lots of stories of empires that have expanded so far, right? And then you get to that point and you realize this is going to cost us so much money and men and supplies and all of that kind of stuff that it's not worth it. And they withdraw. One of the things that I find interesting, just a side note on the Battle of Salamis, is that the Persian king is actually up on a hillside, and he can see that they're fighting in a small area in here, and that's the reason for one of the main reasons why the Athenians or the Greeks are successful is they've got smaller boats. Okay, and what they do is they have on the prow of their boat, they've got this like metal spear-like front on it, and they just ram into each other. This is the whole idea: is you ram into them and sink their ship, and and then you, and if you can't do that, you just pull alongside them. And these Athenian ships have Spartan soldiers on them, and you just tie your ships together, and then you slaughter each other that way. And the Persian king is up there, and he's watching this battle, and one of his commanders of one of his ships is a woman. Which is rather interesting. And now this is perhaps a little bit sexist of him, but he watches it because she's the one that seems to be successful. And he says, my men are fighting like women, and my women like men. That was his comment on it. In the end, they're defeated. All right, so this now is this great, the Greeks coming together, fighting together, with their superior culture, they feel like, right, have defeated the most powerful empire of the Western world, the Persians. Right? And it's going to be now a time of great economic well-being, wealth. They have to rebuild the city, particularly Athens. Athens was invaded by the Persians and a lot of it destroyed. Right? So this is when the Athenians build the Parthenon. Right? And a lot of these buildings that we think of when we think of classical Greece are built during this period. And what's happened is that Athenians say, look, we have to all stick together, right? Because the Persians will probably come again. So let's form an alliance. So they formed an alliance. They had met on one of these islands. I forget, maybe this one? I don't know. It's called Delos. And so they formed a league called the Delian League, right? But it operated a little bit, well, maybe not quite like NATO. But, I mean, it was clear that the Athenians were the ones who were in charge, right? And everybody else had to pay dues, and they all paid their dues to support this, all right? But the treasury was kept in Athens, and Athens was making a lot of money off of this. And they also were able to expand. They took over some silver mines and stuff like that, and that's why they're able to build all these things. But it leads to the other Greek city-states to begin to feel disgruntled with this. All right, why is all our money going to Athens? Why are they getting everything and getting all the glory? Right? And there was a lot of glory there. And Athens was this strange state that was also experimenting in government at the time. So we speak of Athenian democracy, which really expands at this time as long as you are an adult male citizen, right, which is a relatively small group of the people living there, but as long as you're there, you get to participate in government, right? And so they have these regular councils where they'll pull together everybody, but they understand that you have to have smaller groups to actually, take care of the day-to-day business. What do? They elect people by lot. I mean, this was a true democracy. It was essentially they had an elaborate system for doing this, but it's essentially, whoever gets the shortest straw, you're on this council, and they had these councils made up of people entirely drawn by lot, right? The rest of the Greeks tended to look at them and say, wow, you're crazy, you're going to get some real idiots on, governing you, and they say, well, yeah, but we've got a group of 10 or a group of 100, and they'll sort of outweigh, the idiots among them. So, but this is what they did. So this was really, really an experiment in democracy. Now, one of the things that they did do was they elected their generals, and they had 10 generals, and those were elected, and they could get reelected and so forth and so on. So you had some sort of stability in the background there. All right, I need to finish up. Peloponnesian War. So what happens is eventually a new league is developed in this area. This region here is known as the Peloponnesus, under the leadership of Sparta, and the Spartans take on the Athenians and their allies. So it's the Spartans and their allies against the Athenians and their allies. And you have this war that goes on, let me get the dates, from 431 to 404. We actually have a very good account. One of the best accounts of this is called The History of the Peloponnesian War. It's by Thucydides, and Thucydides is one of my absolute favorite ancient writers. And I used to teach not only ancient history like this at Warren Wilson, but because I used to work in the government in international relations. I have a degree in that. I used to teach international relations. And when I was teaching international relations and the way one country, countries interact with one another, we used to read Thucydides for that as well, because it was absolutely relevant to what was going on in the world today. All right, so look, it's a long, long war. It's not being fought all the time. The first part of it is mainly the Spartans come and they attack Athens. Athens has big city walls. Athens waits for the Spartans to go away, and then and the Spartans do go away, and then they come back the next year and the next year, and nothing much happens. And the Athenians actually have built walls all the way down to their port so that they can get to their port. And they take their navy and they raid the coastline and take places like that. The long and short of it is, eventually, the Spartan and their allies, the Peloponnesian League, do defeat the Athenians, right? And there's some people that turn traitor in the whole thing, and they take over Athens in the this would be in the year 404, and they get rid of the Athenian democracy, and they put in their own rulers. They're known as, at least by the Athenians, they're known as the 8 tyrants. But they only last for about 8 months. I mean, Sparta was not a colonial power. Sparta just took care of its own affairs. Sparta, over half of its population was enslaved, right? So they had to have people at home to keep the enslaved people under control, right? So that they couldn't go out and control. They weren't really an imperial power at all. And so everything sort of goes back to the way it was. The problem is, the way it was is that everybody is much, much weaker now, right? And all these city-states are quite weak, and they're divided, and the economy has been ruined. And, 50 years earlier, you'd been at your height, the Parthenon, Socrates, all these plays, Aeschylus, and all the rest of them. And all of that stuff has pretty much disappeared. And you begin to see a new power emerging up here, the Macedonians, right, who are also Greek, but they speak a kind of dialect that's not easily understood. They're seen as, by the other Greeks, as being this backward, uncivilized people. They're ruled by a king, okay, and that's not the way, especially the Athenians, want to do things. So they see them as uncultured and so forth. But they are actually unified under this king, and they're quite a bit more powerful, and they begin expanding, and eventually these Macedonians under King Philip defeat the Greek city-states. So all these Greek city-states are defeated, and they're brought under the control of the Macedonians. I want to get you the date. They completed this conquest by 338 BC. So 338 BC, we're having the Macedonians come in. What's interesting is, though, is the Macedonians say, look, we won't subject you to anything. We want you to be part of us, right? You recognize us as your king, and we're all Greeks together, and we love Greek culture just as much as you do, right? And we're going to expand, and we're going to take Greek culture everywhere. And they do exactly that. Because when Philip dies, it appears he might have been murdered by his wife. At any rate, his son takes over, who is Alexander. Alexander III, or as we know him, Alexander the Great. Right? And Alexander is 20 years old when he takes over, and he begins to expand this Macedonian kingdom that's moved down into here, now all the way across here, go down, take over Egypt, okay? And this is the time now when the Egyptians are defeated, and they would come under Greek rule, right? And then move out this way and take over all of the Persian Empire, move as far east as India, right? An enormous area under the control of a leader who starts off when he's 20. He dies in the year 323. So he conquers all of this land in a period of about 10 years. And then he dies. It's hard to say exactly what. Maybe malaria, maybe from heavy drinking and exposure, whatever. Right? The problem for Alexander is that he has no natural successors, and so all of this empire is going to be divided up into basically 4 different kingdoms. But they're all under Greek commanders, and they spread Greek culture throughout all of this area. Right? And the centers of this, I mean, Athens remains a center, but for example, Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great here in Egypt, has the largest library in the Western world at this time, okay? And the Greeks that take over this area, and the last of these Greek rulers over Egypt before the Romans take it over is somebody named Cleopatra. What language does Cleopatra speak? Greek. All right? She speaks Greek. All right? Why is the New Testament in Greek? Greek is the language of this area. If you're an educated person, you speak Greek. Even after the Romans take it over, they rule this area using Greek. That's the language of this area. And you can see, Greek-style theaters, coliseums, whatever, all through this region. And this was an area under, it's known as the Hellenistic period, right? So the Greeks' name for themselves was the Hellenes, and so this is the spread of Greek culture. It's not, after Alexander, it's not under one single ruler. There are a number of rulers that take this area over, but they are all sort of descended from the various generals of Alexander, and so it has this very, very heavy Greek influence, okay? And that's then the world that, and it doesn't show up on this map, maybe I've got one more, that these people living in this tiny little settlement on a few hills in Rome begin to merge into that world. So that's what I'm going to pick up the next time, which will be in 2 weeks' time. All right? And I think I've taken up all my time. I'm happy to answer questions, or if you want to stick around and if you want to ask questions, I'm happy to attempt to do that. But thank you. Thanks.